Hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On tonight's Mark Steyn show, war is upon us. The largest country in Europe has invaded the second largest from the north, from the east, and from the south. Britain and America and Europe are promising sanctions, and no, not the joke sanctions of 48 hours ago, but real, we mean it this time stuff. The eminent historian David Starkey is among my guests, but we're always most eager to know what you think. Email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or Twitter me at gbnews. We'll get to it after the news with Miranda Shankar.
Thank you, Mark. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Ukraine's port city of Mariupol is under heavy fire, with a diplomatic source saying hundreds of explosions have been observed. It comes after Russian forces captured the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Well, Ukraine says 57 people have been killed and 169 were wounded today. In response to the invasion, the Prime Minister has announced the UK is imposing the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions Russia has ever seen. Boris Johnson says new trade restrictions are being introduced and there'll be further sanctions targeting 100 individuals, entities and subsidiaries.
We will continue on a remorseless mission to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece, day by day and week by week. And we will, of course, use Britain's position in every international forum to condemn the onslaught against Ukraine, and we will counter the Kremlin's blizzard of lies and disinformation by telling the truth about Putin's war of choice and his war of aggression.
Well, the Prime Minister also rejected President Vladimir Putin's claim that Russia was left with no choice but to take military action.
I'm driven to conclude that Putin was always determined to attack his neighbour, no matter what we did. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
Well, the US is also ramping up sanctions against Russia. It's also taking action against 24 Belarusian individuals and entities for supporting Moscow's invasion. President Biden says Kremlin claims it reacted after being threatened by Ukraine and NATO are completely unfounded.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time.
Well, to the markets, and £77 billion was wiped off the FTSE 100 as global markets tumbled following the incursion. UK stocks fell 2% in what's been the worst day for the markets in nearly 2 years. Companies with close links to Russia were hardest hit. Or on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
War has come to Europe, between the two largest countries in Europe. In fact, President Macron calls it a, quote, turning point in history, but it isn't. Not really. That's just the hyper-narcissism of the present tense. Permanence is the illusion of every age, and that's particularly true in an age of mass media that enables you to live in a hyper-present tense, to hold the moment, as Goethe's Faust wanted to. But if you step back, war is as native to Europe as French wine and German sausage and Ukrainian women at London escort agencies. War comes along every generation, and the conditions that prevail at the end of each war nicely set us up for the next. The Franco-Prussian War laid the ground for the Great War, which in turn incubated the conditions for World War II, which led to the, quote, 70 years of peace and security that nitwit Kamala Harris was rhapsodizing about the other day. Under that 70 years of peace, half of Europe was a prison state. And when the prison walls crumbled, the Balkans fell into war and some 150,000 people died. That was in the 90s. So we're about due for another, which started today. Old school war, that's with soldiers, tanks, bombers. The question is whether it's a contained war, as in Yugoslavia, or it spreads. Belarus has already indicated it would like a piece of the action. Ukraine is unusually central to world affairs these days. Ukrainians are the biggest donors to the Clinton Foundation. Don't ask me why. I guess they just like ponying up millions for a speech by Chelsea Clinton on diarrhea in Africa. Joe Biden's family, his brother, his son, himself, have made millions from their Ukrainian, quote, business interests. And when a Ukrainian prosecutor showed rather too much interest in investigating Hunter Biden's, quote, business interests, Joe Biden had the prosecutor fired and then boasted about it on camera. He boasts a lot, of course. He famously plagiarized Neil Kinnock's line that he was the first in his family in 1,000 generations to go to university, which wasn't actually true. On the other hand, his son, Hunter Biden, is the first Biden in 1,000 generations to become a Ukrainian oligarch, which is even more impressive when you think about it. But when President Trump brought that up in a telephone call with his Ukrainian counterpart, they impeached him over it. For a place 99.99% of Americans couldn't find on a map, it looms weirdly large in Washington. It seems to exist in Washington mainly as a grift for the talentless children of Washington's talentless political class. So everyone who matters in the District of Columbia is hot for war, or at least a simulacrum thereof, and the 300 million Americans who don't matter want no part of it whatsoever, because the fall of Kabul is still fresh in their minds. So it's a weird situation in the United States right now, because the Republicans looked like they were going to clean up in the midterm elections later this year and reverse what happened in November 2020. And now the usual bipartisan uniparty rooting for boots on the ground all over the planet is back on the screens. And I would say that's likely to depress Republican turnout because it's going to distract people from how lousy Biden has made everything on the domestic front. So all these idiot Republican Party senators talking up war, boots on the ground, are back on the screens. Lindsey Graham and other unlovelies. And Republicans may just sit on their hands this November. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. Dr. David Starkey is with me, and unlike many other people on our television screens, he actually knows what Ukraine is and where Ukraine is. So, David, let's start with the most basic question. What is it that's just happened, and why did Putin do it?
Because Putin thinks that he's a czar. What Putin is doing, he's told us, Mark. I mean, this is what's so extraordinary. Putin, just like Hitler in Mein Kampf, has been telling us for years what he intends to do. He intends to revive the Tsarist empire. He, back in those days when we had decent American presidents, they got a bust of Churchill in the Oval Office. He has got a whole statue of Peter the Great. It's Peter the Great who conquers one half of the Ukraine. It's Catherine the Great who conquers the other half. And it's the great Russian idolized general Alexander Suvorov who conquers the area immediately, the Crimea and everything else that's on the Baltic. He sees himself, Putin sees himself as reversing the loss of that through the disintegration of the Soviet Union, through the persistent, what you were describing there, the nibbling of American capitalism into crony capitalism in the Ukraine. He sees it as his mission to recover it. Putin is a czar. But there's something else, Mark. Putin understands force. Biden doesn't. We're in a world that we thought we've ever seen. Sorry, I think you were wrong in what you dare. Am I allowed to say you're wrong in your account there of Europe? We have lived in a myth since the Second World War. We had little wars in the Balkans. We had little wars in Libya, where else? But broadly speaking, we haven't had big wars because what we did, we imagined, we in the West, that we didn't need force, that force was nasty. So what does your country do? Even more than most. What does America do? What does my country do? We spend 80% of our revenues on welfare and health and pensions. All the other activities of the state, including the fundamental one, which is keeping us safe, shrink to these tiny little sums. Putin thinks in the same way as Churchill, as Palmerston, as Bismarck. He understands force. We are at his mercy. It's as simple as that. Which is why you were saying countries that have been worried. It's not simply Belarus wanting a bit of the action. You actually look in Lithuania, they too have declared states of emergency. There is terror. These are. Look at the scene. We've got it now. These vast spaces. And who is there now sitting at his feet? Imran Khan. Because, again, the nonsense that we hear all the time, that now Putin will be a pariah, nobody will want to speak to him. 20% of the world only are democracies. The rest are various varieties of dictatorships. They love what Putin is doing. Xi loves what Putin is doing. The Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. Sorry, we've thrown away the only weapon that they understand, which is force. People have been saying this is 1938, this is 1936. It's worse. Right. In 1936, Britain was a great empire. It had vast armed forces, at the world's largest navy. Now we're puny. Yeah. We can simply swear at him and try to impose sanctions. And the sanctions won't bite. He's got a war chest of just short of $500 billion. Like Thatcher with the miners, he's prepared for this war. We've sat and watched.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that. And in fact, the point you made about welfare spending, if you go back to the early 50s, like almost every other European power, what we used to spend then on war and our armies, we now spend on welfare provisions. And that's what made Macron's remark particularly pathetic, I thought, that he seemed genuinely to believe that we were in a post-war world. With hindsight, David, with hindsight, do you think we were just happened to be lucky 30 years ago that Russia happened to have fallen into the hands of a guy who didn't have the stomach for bloodshed? And that's why it was a peaceful dissolution of the Soviet empire. And that this guy really thinks if he can assemble if he can get Ukraine back in the fold, what's to stop him getting the Baltic states back in the fold? Last time round, 30 years ago, the Russian sphere came all the way up to East Berlin. Do you think he's thinking big here?
He could be. The point is, he will go it step by step. He's like all bullies. He pushes to find to the point of weakness. If you give way, he'll push again. On the other hand, do remember, as well, we all know, that the Baltic states, Germany, are covered by the NATO umbrella. But then, what has Putin said? He is prepared for nuclear war. Are we? Are we?
Yeah, no.
And it's worse,
Andy,
because, of course, we've lived in this world of illusion. David. We thought that international law, we thought that human rights existed independent of force. We're now seeing, where is human rights? Where is international law? They are mere illusions. We've lived in a world, I'm sorry, Mark, we've lived in a world of illusion. Reality is hitting us now like a rocket.
Yeah, that's very true. On that point, David, Andy Biggs, who was a big shot guy in Congress and in the Trump administration, was just telling Nigel Farage that as far as he was concerned, he couldn't see Americans going to war for Estonia. So do you think that as a practical matter, NATO may well prove to be an illusion?
God help us if it's true. At least we have a nuclear deterrent. Are we prepared, to get to that point? Will we do another Bay of Pigs? Will we be able to do what Kennedy did and face it down? Do we actually have the will to do it? And I'm sorry, this is the problem, Mark. We have lived in this world of illusion. We've thought that war was so last century, that violence was nasty, that we had really important things to do like worrying about the planet, which of course has left us completely open. As we've destroyed our nuclear power, we've failed to develop our oil resources, we've thrown away the chance to frack, we've thrown away natural gas. Rome ends, the great Empire of Rome ends when the barbarians cut the aqueducts. Putin can simply turn off the gas. Sorry, he can just turn it off, exactly as in 537 the aqueducts were cut and Rome changes from the capital of the world to a malarial-ridden village. Sorry, we've lost the sense of power. We've lost the sense of that states depend on the ability to defend themselves. I mean, Putin actually addresses this question. And when there was the press conference, when he first, 3 days ago, announces his decision that he will go to war, this is before the actual declaration, he was asked a question. Putin's actually quite good at answering questions, unlike Biden and our own Prime Minister. And the chap in the audience said to him, how can a good country go to war? What does Putin say? Why do you think, because you were good, you can't use force? Doesn't goodness depend on the ability of self-defense? Now, Churchill would have thought that. Margaret Thatcher would have thought that. And suddenly, after 1989, we went into this never land. This illusion of the United Nations, this preposterous world of Geneva and New York.
Isn't that actually the problem, though, that Putin, the way he thinks, would have been like any prime minister or president a generation or two back? He's calculating what is in his nation's interest. When you listen to all these people, whether it's Kamala Harris or the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, or the Prime Minister of Canada, the United Kingdom, wherever you want to name, they're all talking as if there's some kind of global commons, the brotherhood of man that they represent. There is no such thing, and as a result, the poor Ukrainians are going to be screwed because they're actually living in the real world, not in this unicorn prancing landscape of Western prime ministers.
Absolutely. I mean, that is it. But it is total illusion. And it's an illusion that they try and apply here. I mean, what is defunding the police about in America? It's this strange notion that there's somehow natural goodness if only we talk to each other. Isn't the emblem of the degeneracy of our society what's going on outside every Russian embassy at the moment? There are lots of lovely little Trustafarian children, all in tears, holding up little signs which say, "Give peace a chance," and "Come by our," and shouldn't we be thinking about the planet? And isn't this is just not what I want? No, so this is the madness. This is the madness.
Is it a consequence of this very unusual period, as you were saying, and as Kamala Harris was saying, this 70-year period, that around about 1950, America basically inherited the world by default because everybody else's capitals had been bombed to rubble, and it's not an empire. It doesn't have an imperialist bone in its body. It's not like the Habsburgs, it's not like the Hohenzollerns, it's not like the Romanovs. And so
it's very like the British Empire. Very like the British Empire.
No, it's nothing like that. But instead it created these transnational bodies that somehow seem to have become a thing in themselves. So you have global elites, the British Empire, the French Empire, Portuguese Empire, whoever you want to name. When they'd go around the world, they were thinking of what's in Britain's, what's in France's, what's in Portugal's interest. Now we have global elites who seem to be a kind of race apart, and their interests seem totally detached from these humdrum nation states they chance to be born in.
Yeah, be careful. It's what you're talking about, the Pax Americana. The Pax Americana is the direct successor of the British Empire, which is why the British Empire is the only empire consciously to have created successor states, and why it consciously creates a successor to the empire in the form of the rules-based Commonwealth. Britain invents globalization. America inherits globalization, but then gives it this extra twist because of the supremacy of American power. The apparent reality of all these international institutions you talked about is because of the combined power of Wall Street on the one hand and the American armed forces on the other. That's what gives the apparent reality. But of course, that reality is now disintegrated. You have rival centers of power. China and now Russia again. Again, all these rude words about Putin. Putin is the world's third power. It's America, it's China, it's Russia. And the rest of us are, with the possible exception of India, we are nowhere. But once you've got that multipolar world, you can't any longer sustain that global illusion that you're talking about. The global illusion always depended on American power, to put it in a simple, compact statement. That's what it depended on. Once American power is now regionalized, because it's been pushed out by China, pushed out by Russia again, once it's regionalized on the one hand, and when it's wielded by whatever we want to call Biden, we can use as many rude names about him as we wish. Once it's wielded in such an incompetent, such a confused and unpurposeful fashion, and of course with the hideous example of Kabul, how can you shape a global order when you run away like frightened rabbits? And the scenes in Kabul were shameful. They were shameful. It was much, much worse than the fall of Saigon. At least in Saigon, there was a serious enemy.
Yeah.
This was simply running away. It was a display of cowardice. How could the troops do it? An army that runs away. And the Russian army doesn't run away, by the way.
No, and we all know that, and we don't like to think how it would go if it actually got into an America-Russian shooting war, because we saw what happened in Kabul. But let me ask you then, if America's 1950 moment, as it were, of global dominance is over, what's next?
A revival of the competition of empires. So isn't it clear that we thought imperialism was dead, And we're told, of course, our own was particularly wicked when it was relatively benign. But you were saying war is as old as mankind. Imperialism is as old as mankind. China is an empire. It just sees itself as an empire. It is about to retake Taiwan. And heaven only help Korea. That used to be part of the sphere of influence. Again, Africa is there to be carved up. Lord only knows what will happen to Australia, because we've thrown our weapons away. We have stripped off. We're naked. We're defences, and we're rich. I mean, Germany is the most obvious example. Have you read today what the head of the German armed forces says? He said, I never thought we would have... This is a soldier. I never thought we would have another war. He was practically crying. And then he went on and said, our armed forces are dry. There's nothing there. They've been doing drill with broomsticks. Germany isn't even a state anymore. Germany is, it's a customs union. It's a machinery for exporting Volkswagen. The EU is exactly the same. And the EU has deliberately set itself up right from the beginning to destroy the nation state, which is the only thing to which people feel the attachment that they'll fight for. No one's going to fight for Europe.
No, absolutely. And so we've created a situation where we have the wealthiest societies in human history. They can't defend themselves. And meanwhile, we have basket cases like North Korea going nuclear. And people somehow expect that Norway, super wealthy, no army, and North Korea, broke, makes nothing but knockoff Viagra, but it has nuclear weapons, that world is going to endure. Thank you, as always, David, for laying out the big picture about what's going on here. It was a pleasure to see you and to listen to that exegesis of what's going on. We're going to get to your reaction next. Day one of war in Europe. More straight ahead on a Thursday Steyn Show.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's get to your views about how far Europe is going to unravel after today's events. A Twitter-type person says we should repossess Roman Abramovich's assets, his home, his businesses, everything. We talk like that. I'm very struck. If you go around Europe, you see far more Russians than you ever used to. If you go to the south of France, they've got all the best tables in the restaurants. If you go to the fancy Swiss ski resorts, they're ensconced in all the fanciest après-ski lodges. And they're all over in London. London apparently now has more butlers than at any time since the Victorian era, and that's not just because this or that 17th Marquess or 14th Earl is particularly keen on keeping his staff of butlers up to date. It's because the Arabs and the oligarchs want them. So we have got drunk on this oligarch money that has flowed into London, flowed into British colonial tax havens, and essentially there's no clear indication yet that you never want to overestimate money being as simple as it is. The grift of all those Washington guys I mentioned in Ukraine. Ukraine became far more important than it ever should have been, just because the usual bunch of corrupt losers were making so much money over in Kiev. Ruth on email says, the most frightening thing I've seen today is the response from Biden. He should be in a care home. He couldn't answer any question in a coherent manner and kept smiling and laughing. I think Putin has timed this perfectly. I would worry that he could push the nuclear button, thinking he was turning on his TV. Ruth, that's not accidental. He's being represented to us as the President of the United States. We know he's no such thing. He's not capable of doing that. What he embodies is what we've been talking about in the last 20 minutes. He embodies the decline and decay of the West. He used to fancy himself back when he's still had his marbles as a real politique guy. He's the guy jetting everywhere like all these big shot senators with their entourages, and he'd jet into some Middle Eastern hellhole, and he'd be able to tell you which particular warlord was different from that particular warlord. And he's lost all that now, and he just talks about transgender bathrooms. And in that sense, he embodies where we are. We'll have more of your views a little later. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin says that this is a, quote, special military operation aimed at the denazification of Ukraine. And all the experts say to that is he's lost it, he's paranoid. There are no Nazis in Ukraine. But on the other hand, here's Yara Sachs, a Toronto MP in the Canadian House of Commons, talking about supporters of the Canadian truckers' convoy.
How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
So honk honk is code for Heil Hitler. Justin Trudeau told a Jewish Tory that she supports people who wave swastikas. The former Chief Justice of Canada appears to agree with him. This is now normal political discourse in the West. Putin sees Nazis in Ukraine. Trudeau sees Nazis in Canadian truckers. Yet Putin's the one who is nuts. And the problem here is, if you really seriously think that Canadian truckers are Nazis, you're never, in that case, when everyone's a Nazi, nobody's a Nazi. As I always say about these things, if you're in Kiev loading up the car, jamming the kids in and preparing to flee west while you can, Ukraine is about Ukraine. If you're in the Russian borderlands and have enjoyed 30 years of freedom from the Baltic states down to the Balkans, Ukraine is about you, because if Putin gobbles Ukraine, someone's going to be next, and you're pretty much looking like the guy who's next. But in the broader geopolitical picture, Ukraine is about a West, that's to say America, Europe, Britain and her lion cubs, as we used to say in happier times. It's about a West that is bankrupt, exhausted, demographically dying, and is painfully and literally embodied in that rotting corpse being passed off as leader of the free world. Whether or not Joe Biden was the first Biden in 1,000 generations to go to university. He's the first so-called American president who would have been right at home in the late 1970s Politburos of Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, when you had basically to be mummified to be eligible for the top job. Putin looks at the West, he looks at us, and he sees only weakness and he smells only decay, to the point where even as his troops roll across the border, the UN Secretary General is reduced to quoting 50-year-old hippie crap from John Lennon.
I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people.
All he is saying is give peace a chance. Yeah, right. Imagine there's no countries. It's easy if you try, particularly in that part of the world. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson plans to bring the Russian economy to its knees.
Today, in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy.
The key words there are designed in time. In other words, what's going on in Ukraine right now isn't going to be reversed anytime soon. The kind of sanctions that would be required to inflict damage, serious damage on Russia, will also inflict serious damage on the West. Not just in Europe, not just with Germany and its dependence on Russian gas, but also in the United States, where the price of petrol at the pump will be going up. They get 700,000 barrels of oil a day from the Russians, which puts Biden's toothless threats in a slightly different context. How many Americans are willing to pay $8, $9, $10, $12 a gallon for gasoline in order not to sully their own landscape with the Keystone Pipeline? Oh, any of that kind of thing. Let's go back. David Starkey's still in shot, I think. Let's go back to David and just talk about that, because I was very struck by what you said about illusion and reality. And the funny thing about it is you think that, okay, we can pretend to be concerned about climate change in the Maldives in the 22nd century because it makes us feel good. We can pretend to be concerned about transgender pronouns or whatever. But in fact, we've gone beyond that, because we're actually applying it to the basic necessities of life now. We have no realization that virtue signaling about a pipeline coming from Canada to America has consequences, and that you wind up depending on oil from the Russian Tsar.
True. The problem is because the world, apparently there is so much, once upon a time, human beings were essentially governed by scarcity. And all classically economics is about scarcity. The other thing that happened in that miraculous period you're talking about from 1945 onwards is ordinary people got richer, more comfortable than they'd ever been before. There seems to be enough for everybody. So we've stopped thinking that, do you know what? There won't be 14 different types of sliced bread in the shop tomorrow. I won't have a choice of 25 different kinds of marmalade. We've got so used to all of this that we've forgotten what it depends on. We're like children. I mean, there's been our politics have become extraordinarily childish. We think we're in a permanent sweet shop. We imagine we just have a choice of, the Americans would say, of candy. We've lost any ability to choose. We imagine we can have security and spend all our money on welfare and pensions and the NHS. We refuse to make hard choices. We all say we want, a beautifully pure carbon-free future. But by the way, we do want to keep our central heating at the same temperature. And it would be terribly inconvenient if I ever had to put a sweater on because I'm used to sitting around in a T-shirt. And by the way, isn't it a human right just to be able to sleep under a sheet, and isn't putting a duvet in? Do you see what I mean? We've lost any notion that you have to make choices. Hard choices. We imagine we can have everything. And do you know what we're discovering? You can't. You've not mentioned one other hugely important thing about Russia. Russia and the Ukraine between them produce 60% of the world's cereals. 60%. They can turn that off as easily as they can turn off the gas. Sorry.
You know, it's funny. It's people go on that Russia doesn't have an advanced economy, but when you are able to export oil and gas and wheat, in the end, people need you more than they need the guy who makes your Netflix subscription remote.
Oh, how could you say that? Come on, how could you say that? But it is mad, isn't it? It is just mad. But again, this mockery of Russia, this sneering at Putin, and there's a childishness about the thing, a kind of playground quality, as though by misquoting Lady Macbeth at him, you've got blood on your hands, sort of thing. He will actually stand back and worry. As I say, there's been an infantilization of our politics.
Well, let me ask you this just finally. Yeah, that's very true. What's so weird is they're all saying basically, you're the guy who's out of step. You need to get with the program and become like us. We all meet up at international bodies.
We all go to Davos. We all go to Davos.
Yeah. And we all go to Davos, and we. John Kerry has just said that the real tragedy today. He just said it today. The real tragedy is that by launching this war, poor old Putin has managed to distract Russians from the real work they need to be doing on climate change. Putin thinks he's, what was that song? They were all out of step but Jim, about the mother watching her son marching in the parade. In this case, Putin, the Russian, they're all out of step but Vlad. Vlad thinks the 59 guys who think it's normal for prime ministers and presidents to have no national interest are the weird ones, and he's the one who's actually right on this.
Of course he is, but it's not only Vlad, it's Z. Come on, China is pursuing an absolutely ruthless policy of national self-advancement. Of course it is, as indeed is India, as is Iran. As I said, there's been this peculiar suicide in the West, in which it's regarded as being somehow rude. A national interest is rather like farting in the United Nations. I'm sorry, it's not.
Okay. On that note, on the issue of John Kerry will be interested in that. He thinks it's the bovine flatulence, but you think it's the human flatulence at the UN. So you're agreed. There's some common ground because you both agreed it's the flatulence. We'll leave it there, David. Thank you very much. And actually, on that point, China today flew into Taiwan's airspace. They know what this moment means. GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GB News. We will have more for you straight ahead. Don't touch that dial.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Do you know what a hashtag is? It's a symbol that's been on typewriter keyboards since the 19th century, but nobody really had much use for it until the internet came along. And then they discovered that that hashtag key had magical properties. The hashtag does. All you have to do is stick it in front of the banality du jour, and you can go viral and never have to give another moment's thought to whatever the banality is about. Indeed, the hashtag is so powerful, you don't even need a computer to make it work. You can write it down on a piece of paper or cardboard and go and stand in your garden, and it will still work magically. Take a look at this. Do you know who that is? That's a minister of the Crown of a supposed G7 nation, NATO member, senior dominion of the Commonwealth. By stand with Ukraine, he doesn't mean he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. He's standing several thousand miles away from Ukraine. And he's got no plans to stand any nearer than his back garden, which should be pretty safe for another year or two, unless Putin's planning on moving faster than our intelligence agencies think. The charge of the lightweight brigade, Kamala, Macron, Liz Truss. If you were Putin, and that's the Western world, that's the free world, that's NATO, that's the EU, why wouldn't you act now? A hashtag is worse than nothing. Look, I've got one too. Hashtag we're screwed. Because if Putin only suspected the West was exhausted, clapped out, dead, cabinet ministers standing in the garden with a piece of cardboard and a tilty head sad cakes expression only confirms it. Hashtag we're over. Our children will live under something else. Military historian and Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley is here. He was here last time round. When the powder keg went up in Yugoslavia, and he emerged from that war. He did very heroic things in that war, which was a dirty war on the part of the principal participants, and he came out of it with great credit. It's good to see you, General. Is what's happening in Ukraine worse than the disintegration of Yugoslavia?
Hello, Mark, and thanks for having me on the show. It's worse by several degrees of magnitude, because the Balkan wars were contained and containable, and although the Russians and indeed we were active by proxy there was an implicit and explicit understanding that this had to be contained and kept out of Europe, out of Central Europe and Western Europe. This is entirely different. This is Putin, as you've remarked and as David Starkey has been saying, fully understanding that Western Europe is at its weakest since 1945. And now's the time for him to act. By his logic, if he left it for a few more years, well, Ukraine could be a NATO member. And then if he's going to go into Ukraine, he has to confront the whole alliance. Why would he do that when he can do it now? When Ukraine is not a NATO member, will not attract a NATO military response at the moment. And meanwhile, the rest of us have spent our money on anything but defense. To me, the interesting question is what comes next in the Ukraine. We assume that Putin's military will win the invasion campaign. It may be more difficult than he thinks because the Ukrainian military is better than it was in 2014. It's one thing, however, to grab a piece of ground. It's quite another to hold it, as we found in Iraq and indeed in Afghanistan. He's putting in perhaps 150,000 troops, including the Belarusians. Our historical norms tell us that if we're going to then occupy a piece of ground, which might then erupt into insurgency, we're going to need about one security force member for every 50 of the population. Now, that looks like about 600,000 Russian troops for quite a long stage. Is he prepared to do that? Hasn't got it. Does he think he can put in a puppet regime in Kiev and hold it that way? Well, on those norms, how long will they last? So maybe this is a massive strategic miscalculation by Putin. It might also, who knows, inflame the opposition movement next door in Belarus, which has been pretty vocal for a while. And I guess a lot of people in Belarus are not too happy about this. But if it is a miscalculation, then for heaven's sake, surely it's got to be an opportunity for the West. Because by heavens, we need to wake up, we need to rearm. We need to rearm physically and we need to rearm morally. Because if we don't, then Putin will just do this again and again and again if he sees an opportunity. Back into Georgia, maybe, back into the Baltics, who knows? He has to understand that NATO Article 5 is NATO Article 5. It stands, but it only stands if the deterrence that it guarantees is credible. And credibility rests on capability, and at the moment our capability is pretty thin.
Well, you make that point about the commitment of NATO members. On the other hand, when you look at the citizens of NATO member countries, the phrase cost of living is back again in a real sense for the first time since the 70s. We've got getting close to double-digit inflation. We've all countries that shut down in 2020 over COVID have basically piled up a century's worth of debt to pay off, and the likelihood of these sanctions is they're likely to make inflation worse and home heating bills worse. So it's a difficult political environment in which to tell people they need to also pay to modernize their navies and air forces and whatever. And you know what those in a sense, what the army gets is what is left over when they've paid for all the social services and the health care and the early retirement and all the other stuff.
Yeah, sure. But without security, what does the rest matter? It doesn't matter at all because it's gone if you're over a barrel or rather looking down the barrel of Putin's gun. Please don't tell me there's no money for this. I've watched government here squander 3 times the defence budget on COVID trick or treat that never worked, on protective clothing that was either cronyism or didn't work, on so-called loans and grants to businesses that will never be put back. I'm looking at £9 million for a situation briefing room in Downing Street. I'm looking at 14 billion quid a year on foreign aid. I'm looking at a space command when we can't even secure our own territorial airspace. Please don't tell me there's no money. Government will find money if it needs it, and by God, it needs to right now, and it needs to do so along with our other partners in NATO, because it's all about NATO, and we can't do it on our own, and it has to be NATO, led by the US, with all that implies. But if we need to do this, and we do need to do this, the money has to be found.
Are you entirely confident that our commanders, or more to the point, our chiefs of staff think the way they used to? The American chiefs of staff are just hopelessly woke. They're going off to teach diversity classes at West Point. They're all about the transgender pronouns. But even here, MI5 and MI6 have just gone off on some... on the very day war breaks out, our intelligence services go off on a retreat to acknowledge and fess up to their white privilege. Are you entirely confident that today's military still thinks like a military to that extent?
Well, I sincerely hope they do, because if they don't, they should not be wearing uniform. I feel very sorry for the people in charge of MI5, MI6, and indeed the service chiefs who are, after all, bound by government policy and are obliged to follow the lines that they're given from their political chiefs, because the military is subject to political constraints and political direction. Let us hope that that political direction will change, and when that changes, what the chiefs are obliged to do will also change. They're all people who've served 30 or 40 years in the military. They know their business, and if they're given the freedom to do it right, they'll do it right.
Well, that's good to hear, General. This is really all about acknowledging the truth about what's happening, and basically it's about recovering, not just in the military, but in other cultural levers of society, about recovering something as basic as a survival instinct. And I never thought we would actually have to say that about some of the oldest societies on Earth, but Putin is reminding us of some old truths tonight. Thank you very much for that.
And maybe that's a good thing. It's probably overdue. It's probably overdue, because as well as physical rearmament and reversing the last defence review cuts along with our NATO allies and rebuilding defence. I mean, we're spending only less than 2% now, 5% and above during the height of the Cold War. There also has to be moral rearmament. We've got to understand that if we want freedom and we want democracy, it has to be fought for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it has to be earned. It doesn't come to anybody for free. That is for sure. Thank you very much for that. That is going to do it for us tonight. But don't worry, Dan Wootton is here to make it a thumping Thursday for 2 fabulous hours, even on day 1 of war in Europe. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Any wintry showers and strong winds tend to ease gradually overnight, leaving icy patches in their wake, but a drier and sunnier day is expected on Friday. There'll be some clear spells in the south and the east through the night, but during the evening, further rain, sleet and hill snow showers could cause issues for northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. As they fade away during the hours of darkness, they leave behind some slippery surfaces, some icy patches to wake up to on Friday. 0 to 1 Celsius for Scotland and Northern England, 2 to 4 for Northern Ireland, England and Wales. But Friday itself sees high pressure towards the southwest of the UK build across the country, and as a result the wind finally eases and those showers also ease. There'll still be 1 or 2 around first thing, southwest Scotland, northwest England into the Midlands. Otherwise plenty of sunny spells, and that sunshine becomes widespread by the afternoon. Up and down the country it's looking dry for a few hours, and with those sunny spells with lighter winds it will feel pleasant. Temperatures reaching 10 Celsius in the south, 8 or 9 for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. But for Scotland, it turns cloudy by the end of the afternoon, as well as Northern Ireland. Outbreaks of rain move through here. Generally, it's light on and off rain,